I have an interview for you from an Evergreen student who was in the program briefly called MediaWorks, which took place last year, which would be the fall of the 2017-2018 school year. Now, the special thing about MediaWorks is that in the spring of 2017, before the protests, somebody advertised for this particular program taught by Naima Lowe to be filled up with mostly brown and black students. Then another student parodied that advertisement on Facebook and asked that there be a mostly white class. That parody post sparked a 300 comment long flame war, which spilled out into real life and became the spark that ignited the powder keg of the Evergreen Spring. So this is a first-hand view of what it was like to be in the class that was supposed to be the shining example of equity and inclusion. And I have more information about the professor of this class that I'm going to leave out of this video and make another video about, because I don't want to frame this young man's experience by my own research. So here you go. His name's Thomas Hadley. And as ever, I urge those who watch this video to use this as material, not to fuel their hatred for individuals or their hatred for anything rather, but to understand this as the outcome of certain ways of thinking, of certain ideologies, which Evergreen has embedded into its mission statement, going as far back as 2012, which is actually coincidentally when the enrollment began to drop. So here's Thomas Hadley. What was the climate on the campus in general over the course of last year?
The last year?
Yeah, over just the past year.
I was more involved in the 2016 to 2017 school year because I was living on campus, and then this last year I was bouncing back and forth between apartments like outside of campus. I'm closer now. But in the last year, I feel like I've been a bit more cut off, other than in classes, from what's been going on. And so, I mean, really, like my experience has been, like having this last year taken a critical reasoning class and then a computer science class. Both of those were actually set up in ways that people could have intelligent discussions and disagree with each other, without it just turning into someone shouting like I'm offended at anyone else, and things just immediately devolving into people throwing emotional punches at each other.
And you've seen that in class.
Yeah. But I mean, like really, like the more academically rigorous classes don't have that as much, just because the students that they're attracting are the ones who I think are happier to have their ideas challenged a bit, and I think are a bit more humble to the fact that they don't know everything already. Whereas I think some, like the arts and humanities classes, are I think a bit more likely to attract students and also kind of tell them like, hey, you already have all the knowledge you need to have. We want to hear your truth. We're here to have you express as clearly and loudly as possible what your truth is. There's less of an emphasis on students coming in knowing that they don't know everything and trying to learn more and figure out how to better themselves, and it's more, I don't know, it turns into people fighting more often. I think part of how things can go wrong is that at the beginning of every class, or for a lot of them, people come up with like a student covenant, essentially, where everyone agrees to different rules, I guess, about like what is and is not permissible. And so in the MediaWorks class, and this is kind of mirrored in another film class that I was in, what happens, or what happened in both cases, and I can more clearly remember the MediaWorks one, was so everyone comes up with rules about like what they would like everyone to know beforehand, I guess, or what they want conduct to be, like what they want the rules that everyone is agreeing to abide by to be. And so with MediaWorks, at the beginning, someone put forward, like when we were all deciding and brainstorming ideas, someone put forward the idea of like, hey, please respect my opinion, even if it's different from yours, which seems fine. That seems okay. That seems like it could be useful for class discussions. And then the immediate response to that was, okay, well, yeah, so that's good, but not if those opinions harm anyone. We shouldn't accept people's opinions if they're harmful to anyone. And so what is harmful is just left vague and not defined, but what's implied is that it's whatever doesn't fall in line with kind of like the collective orthodoxy of the class, essentially. And then so that was met with, okay, all right, so that's good, but I think that it's probably good to have, or I think someone said something about call-in culture as opposed to call-out culture. Someone was like, yeah, that's good, but I think that what we should do is try to make it so that if someone says something that's problematic or offensive in any way, we explain to them why it's wrong, why they shouldn't be saying that, why that opinion is harming people, but we should do it in a way that offers people the ability to then like redeem themselves and come back in to our inner circle of acceptable opinion, right? So we should call them in to our group as opposed to excommunicating them immediately and just saying, oh, you're bad, you're wrong. And then that was immediately met with some of the more radical or outspoken students in the class saying, okay, yeah, that's fine, but also it's wrong to tell anyone that they need to be civil or that they shouldn't call people out for doing things that are harming them. Like, it's important that we have the ability to call people out and really like make it clear to them that they're hurting us, and we shouldn't have to in any way like silence ourselves or hold ourselves back when we're doing that. And that's ultimately what the teachers landed on. So I think that was like the second day of the class, and it was written essentially into the agreed upon student code of conduct that there is an orthodoxy of acceptable opinion, and we haven't totally laid that out, but it's kind of implied. Everyone kind of knows what it is, and if you don't agree with it, if you commit any kind of like a thought crime, essentially, then it's just fine for people to chew you out as aggressively as they see fit, and there's not going to be any kind of there's no recourse for that.
So they can be as harmful as they want.
Yeah.
If you harm them.
Yes. Or yeah, if you say anything that's perceived as being like a microaggression or something that's just deemed as being bad for whatever reason, then which I guess whatever the collective group that holds more power within the classroom setting has unlimited recourse, essentially. I mean, not to the point of like punching you or throwing you and or like
but they can harm you with words.
Yeah, but it's fine if they berate you to the point of tears. Yeah. And it didn't seem like there was a way around that, because that was clearly what the teachers were. The teachers were just capitulating to those voices that were pushing for that, as opposed to stepping in more and saying, oh, well, maybe that's not a great idea. Maybe we should, maybe not. Maybe not that.
This is the class that the person that we're not talking about actually advertised, which Chiave actually parodied, which led to the protest. So this is the class that started the protest.
Yes.
And this is what the class they wanted. And the person that advertised this class ended up being the most powerful person in this class.
Yes.
Basically guided this class.
Yes. At least while I was there. So I was only really involved in the class for the first 4 out of 30 weeks.
Well, you couldn't last that long.
Yeah, it was pressured out. I don't think the person X stayed in the entire time. I don't think the person X was there by the last quarter. So I don't know what happened. I really wish that you could talk to them about it, but that seems impossible. But it would be fascinating for the purposes of this documentary to be able to sit down and try to mediate with the different parties involved and see what an actual dialogue between everyone would be like. Just because all the video that exists is just people screaming and talking past each other. I don't know what happened to all the students that were involved in the protest, because I heard mixed things. I heard that some people got disciplined for their
Between 7 and 9.
For what? Who was disciplined and for what? What were they doing? Because it seems like other people were rewarded for taking part in it. So I'm not sure.
You can look
where
at the
the
rewards
administration
and
drew
say
the line.
you can twist that reward and say that it was a punishment, but it was actually a reward.
How was it remotely a punishment?
It's called rehabilitation, or it's compassionate. Or there's a,
but then they took those students that they were punishing and put them in positions of power
That was the
over
punishment.
other students, which that seems absurd.
That was supposedly to educate them so that they would understand the weight of their actions. And
I didn't see that happening at all. So I mean, maybe behind the scenes, but that.
And that's kind of the story. I mean, that's the story. There's one person who was very vocal in the protests, and they were punished by being put in a position of power, given the ability to teach freshman orientations on race relations, given the ability to interact with the student code of conduct and try to rewrite it. And that was in order to educate this person to change their behavior. And
so calling it a punishment is just semantic, essentially?
No, they thoroughly, the people who did this, I have the documents, they thoroughly believe that this was a disciplinary action, or at least that is what the documents say.
That's absurd. So there was a clear hierarchy in terms of how the class was structured, and that person was at the top of it, like even above the teachers, to the point that part of the reason why I was pressured out of the class was because of or part of what led to it was kind of sticking my neck out a bit when student X began verbally berating one of the teachers to the point of tears for an exercise where all the students were where we created kind of like a line, I guess, in between 2 points in a room, and the teachers would give two words, and which were supposed to be antonyms, I guess, and then you would just pick where on the spectrum you fit between those two things. So it would be like carnivore or vegan would be one of them, anarchist or patriot, which I took issue with because those two things aren't antonyms. And like East Coast, West Coast, things like that. I think male, female, or masculine, feminine. I forget exactly how they phrased it, but so something involving like gender. So the point is just like, where do you fit on the spectrum? And I think the one that really pissed everyone off, or that pissed off not everyone, but the people that got upset about it, was dirty and clean. Because they felt that it had racial connotations, which I still don't totally understand that. Some students got very upset to the point of shouting down the teacher who'd orchestrated the thing and just verbally berated her for being insensitive, to the point of her crying and apologizing and saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I tried to clear all of these with students beforehand to make sure that we wouldn't be offending or harming anyone. And I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." And so she's saying all this while she's like crying and starting to break down, because all the students are or not all the students, but a small percentage of very vocal kind of hostile students. And
you said that they had power.
And they were clearly at the top of the hierarchy of the class, I guess, in terms of who people would just cede to immediately. And then so in the wake of that, so she was crying and apologizing, and the response from those students was no, of course we don't forgive you, and so they continued doing that, and berating her. And so then I stepped in and I said, "Hey, I don't want to discredit anyone else's experience. I just wanted to throw out that I thought it was interesting, and in different ways. I mean, clearly I had a different experience than some of the other students in the class, but I think that I got something out of it, I don't know. So I just wanted to express to the teacher that it wasn't all terrible, and that I felt like I kind of understood why she was doing it, and that I had found it interesting in some ways. And another student then also came in to Surrey's defense, and then that small coalition of students turned their attention towards berating us for standing up for her, to any degree. And then the response by that was for the teachers to just like call a break for the class for a while. I forget exactly, maybe like half an hour or something like that. And the only people that they talked to during that period of time and tried to make amends with were those students who had turned everything into kind of like a shouting match, I guess, both with faculty and with other students in the classroom. Like at no point did they come up to me. I don't think that they went up to the other student who also kind of stuck his neck out. And afterwards, it was clear that that's all they cared about was making sure that those people that they were heard and that whatever their needs were appeased, regardless of how it affected anyone else in the classroom, including the faculty.
How did you feel the learning environment was for that class then?
Oh, it was a mess. I mean, I don't feel that bad about the fact that I got pressured out of it, because watching all the student films at the end of it, like I learned substantially more about the filmmaking process at a community college than I think I would have doing an entire year intensive there. Like I don't think that they were actually going that much into the technical aspects of filmmaking or teaching people anything remotely useful. It was mostly political indoctrination.
And that's what got you.
And that's what got me pressured out.
You wrote a 3 or 2 page polemic toward the ideology that you felt Anne Fischel, the professor, was teaching.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, you basically called her out for being some version of postmodernism. Truth being hyper relative.
Yes. That was like the first claim of the class when we went in. That was like the first thing that they were pushing, was the idea that documentaries are not true, which is in part correct, right? I mean, well, or so just because any film or media or anything, any like book, any collection of ideas or any like list of facts, whoever is compiling that is choosing what they're putting in and what order they're putting everything in. And so you can't take away human involvement from the process in terms of how people are choosing to put forward any kind of a narrative, I guess. I think that that's the point that they were trying to make, essentially. But they weren't going into it with any kind of real depth. And it seemed clear to me that there was a major problem with that, with just telling all these students that everything that they see is kind of fake or kind of untrue, like it's all kind of fake news, without explaining the tools that they can use to try to be more or less accurate. Because clearly there's a difference between like InfoWars and the New York Times, right? I mean, so you can say that both have some amount of bias and storytelling because there are people that are compiling everything, but there's clearly a distinction in terms of like veracity or which source we should take more seriously, or what styles of truth-telling we should take more seriously than others, and that just wasn't being addressed in the class, and I felt like it had like cult-like implications, because they were just telling people nothing is true, but they weren't really saying that, because I don't think that people putting that forward are being completely honest, because they still have opinions about anything, and they still think that certain narratives are more accurate or true than others. So Anne specifically, she wrote a piece for, was it the Washington Post or Washington Times or something like that? But I mean, she wrote with some other faculty. She wrote a piece about the fake news narrative about what had been going on at Evergreen. And so part of my criticism of her and sort of what was being taught in the class was how on what grounds is your narrative more accurate than any other narrative about what's going on, if you're just teaching everyone that is all constructed and it's all kind of false or subjective to some extent, and it's not really based on any kind of like a hard, objective, verifiable truth. What makes your perception of anything more valid than all of the people who disagree with you? And I didn't feel like she ever really addressed that in a meaningful way. So to be fair, to give her credit, I asked if there was some kind of like an alternative means of earning credit for the class where I wouldn't have to be as present in the day-to-day workshops, because I didn't feel like they were teaching anything. I didn't feel like they were teaching us anything about film. Like, it was mostly a sort of like political indoctrination. And I felt like I already kind of knew what they were, like the gist of what they were going for, and I wasn't getting anything out of it. And the atmosphere of the class was becoming kind of like increasingly toxic. So I asked if I could like figure out some other way to get full credit within the class that wouldn't involve being, I guess, subjected to all the screaming and shouting that was going on.
Was that a regular occurrence? That voices were raised? And
I don't know that I would say every single class, but it was always kind of a tense atmosphere, or I remember it being a fairly tense atmosphere at least. I mean, just because most of the students were kind of on the same page in their anger, I guess, so they weren't always like just ripping each other apart. Whenever there was an opportunity to rip someone apart, then people would be happy to jump on it. But for the most part, people kind of knew to like keep their heads down, unless they were siding with the collective. So yeah, I don't know. I thought I wasn't a fan of it. It didn't feel like an open dialogue at all, and it didn't feel like anyone was really learning anything. They were all just kind of further reinforcing their own belief systems with each other, which is kind of a problem when you get a bunch of people that agree in a room. Like, where do they go from there?
The first thing you heard about your situation after you sent Anne your seminar paper was walking into class, or did you get any emails before that?
I think that I sent the paper on a Thursday, or something, like it was at the end of that school week, and then on the Monday of the next week, I went in and was told that I should go talk to the deans about something, just because it didn't seem like I was going to be able to stay in the class.
So you weren't allowed to go into the class, basically?
I was pressured out. I went to go sit in and do everything, and then Anne came up to me and said that I should go to the dean's office. It felt more like a command than a question, I guess, of like, oh, would you like to do that? And it was kind of surreal, because it felt like they were all kind of like walking on eggshells around me, so it sort of became clearer that some kind of ongoing conversation had been happening between everyone, and they were trying to figure out how to deal with me without really being totally upfront with me about everything that had been going on. So they told me that it seemed like I was just going to have to figure out like an alternate form of credit, or that I would have to see if I could get a teacher to approve me for an ILC or to transfer into some other program, but it was going to be difficult because it was already 4 weeks into the 10-week quarter at that point. So I made it clear when I was talking to them that I had no problems working with Anne, and that like I disagreed with her strongly on things, but that she was, you know, she was a person, and I could deal with being around people that I disagreed with even strongly about things. But they made it clear that that just wasn't going to happen. And then so since getting the emails and seeing everything, she made it clear to them that she just wasn't going to be around me, even though there wasn't any kind of a clear student conduct violation on my end. They said that I could fight to stay in the class, but that it would probably be more trouble than it was worth, or just that it would be, so they made it seem like the best way forward was to just take an ILC, do whatever art stuff you want to do.
And did you have any more contact with Anne after that?
Well, I don't know. I went to a handful of other classes, so I was still technically in the class for 4 credits, because we'd already started a group project. And I didn't want to just like bail on the people that I was working with. So I think that, so there were some vague interactions, but it was always kind of surreal it was just always kind of weird because it was clear that like a bridge had been burned between the two of us, but also I don't think either of us are especially like outwardly aggressive people, even if we have kind of strong feelings or opinions about things. So it was just like very calm discussions between the two of us, but where it was just like clear that like, I don't know, we're not friends, or just that she didn't want anything to have to do with me. So I mean, there wasn't that. I saw her intermittently, but nothing was ever really addressed, which is too bad. I wanted her to respond. Part of the issue is that I was kind of used to professors that I could strongly disagree with who would fight back a bit. And so I could be like, hey, I think you're wrong, and this is why I think you're wrong. And then they would come back at me with like no, actually this is what you're not thinking of, this is what you're missing. And this is why I feel like I can defend the opinion that I'm putting forward. And I was hoping that I would get that from her, but I didn't. It seemed like she just didn't want to deal with it. Which I kind of get, because she was, at that point, already kind of retired. She was coming back kind of as a favor to Naima, I think. And she just probably didn't want to deal with the student that was going to make her life more difficult by just questioning everything that she was putting forward. Which I think is just, not good if you're a teacher. But as a person, I get it. I get not wanting to deal with someone who's just like, well, why? Or I don't agree with that. I think you're being silly. I get it, kind of.